Imagine seeing this on your local patch, because this is what Dan Lettis saw off the coast of Cork in Ireland, where he lives. It's a humpback whale, baleen whale, sieving food through those baleen plates. Now that's impressive enough, but then imagine when you see it doing this, because this humpback is doing what's called bubble netting. It's blowing bubbles out of its blowhole, and it's going round in a circle to create a sort of net, and then it comes up in the middle and takes a huge mouthful of fish, and in this case it was sprat. Impressive to see, but doubly impressive because you don't often see humpback whales doing that by themselves.
No.
It's usually something they do collectively.
Well, it's a learned behaviour.
And it's a lot of communication that
Yeah.
goes on between the whales. So impressive stuff, seeing a single whale do that. But actually, this was an individual that was a known individual from the Whale and Dolphin Ireland group. And they know it as HBIRL 082. And it's actually the Irish Whale and Dolphin group, let me get that right. And that's HB Humpback IRL Ireland 082. Really catchy. And they spotted it because of its fluke. And each fluke is individual with those individual markings. So they recognise this one. They've seen it 6 times in the last 8 years. And they noticed that it hung around for 30 days feeding. And I love this statistic because it was an area the size of Wembley Stadium, is what they said.
It stayed there all of that time.
Yeah.
It's been packed with food.
Must have been, mustn't it? And of course, it's on its migration. They do these huge migrations on its way to its feeding grounds in the north. But what is really exciting about this is people are seeing humpback whales more and more around our coast. When we were kids in the 1980s, yeah, back then when we
Eating
were
gravel.
kids, yeah. It was an incredibly rare sight because humpback whales were killed. They were whaled, and then there was an international moratorium on whaling in 1986. And since then, people have noticed there has been a recovery, which is fantastic. You stop hunting these things and they're given a chance to bounce back.
It wasn't only the bubble netting that Dan recorded on his drone, though. Take a look at this. It's another piece of whale behaviour. Particularly interested me. Here it is, at the surface. It's just taken a deep breath. It's about to dive. What else does it do? It poos. Poos into the ocean. And this is something that whales typically do. I've been in the water with whales, and when they dive, you get covered in their poo.
Charming.
Birds defecate before they take off to lighten their load. Why do whales defecate before they dive? Well, the first thing is that they change their metabolism to allow them to get to those greater depths, and that effectively shuts down their digestion. And the other thing is, I don't know if you've tried this yourself, but you know, ingesting faeces under high pressure is not easily done, and you want to try and avoid that, so they defecate at the surface. But that poo is really important. It's important for something we call the whale pump, and I'm about to demonstrate how the whale pump works. Here is the whale. Now let's imagine that it's on the surface, and this particular whale dives down to a lower depth where it feeds at this lower depth on perhaps small fish, krill, whatever it's after. And then it comes back to that surface, having fed all the way down there, comes up here, digests its food closer to the surface, and then before it dives again, it produces its faeces. And these, of course, are very rich in essential nutrients and minerals, particularly things like nitrogen, phosphorus and iron. In fact, there are 550 times the amount of iron in whale faeces than there is in the surrounding seawater. And this is incredibly important for the whole marine ecosystem. Because in the presence of sunlight close to the surface of the water, with all of these nutrients, it gives phytoplankton, essentially marine algae, marine plants, the opportunity to prosper. They've got all the nutrients they need, they've got the sunlight, and they can produce this bloom. So lots of free-floating algae there, which is good. But then, of course, what comes after that? Things that eat the algae. And this would be zooplankton, lots of marine organisms, which are herbivores, feeding on that. Some of them are a little larger, become carnivores, the start of a whole food chain. What eats those smaller organisms? Larger organisms, like the fish here. And of course, sometimes the whale might eat these fish on, excuse me, I'll just have to retract the feces, as you do. Don't try that at home. Don't try that at home. Listen, it then sometimes might feed on fish at the surface and then dive back down and start the whole process again. Essentially, when you think about it, it can be moving nutrients from the lower part of the ocean to the surface in the same way that earthworms move nutrients up through the soil in your garden to the growth area at the top where all of those herbs are. So that's the whale pump. But of course, whales don't just go up and down like this. They also occasionally get their food, they do their feeding, and then they move from one part of the ocean to another. And this is what we call the whale conveyor. So they can move, as you know, thousands of kilometres. The ones that we were looking at there, filmed by Dan, could have come from the Dominican Republic or the Cape Verde Islands, and they're on their way back to the Arctic. So fantasising about feces, you could see a whale feeding somewhere off the Azores and then swimming all the way up to the Arctic before it takes a dump and redistributes those nutrients. And that, folks, is fantastic. And I think, frankly, that's what you pay your licence fee for. The whale pump. Feces under pressure, the whole ecosystem being supported by whale poo. Isn't it great?
I'll tell you what, you never thought on a Tuesday night you'd hear so much information all concerned around whale poo. I mean, that's brilliant.
And like I said before, please don't retract the feces into your own body like that.
Definitely not something advisable. Let's put him back.
No, you
there,
can't.
Because we've lost the magnet.
But the magnets are on the floor.
Okay.
The highly expensive magnets are on the floor. I'll just casually hold it in position like that.